Hey, what's up, you guys? Kurt Stubbs. The first edition, the first episode of the Blast from the Past, where we take a look at some of the great iconic figures from college basketball past. And boy, do we have a great guest here today to get this thing started. We got the Ruston rifle, Scotty Thurman. Scotty, what's going on, man?
Hey, nothing much, man. How are you guys doing?
Oh, not too bad. Trying to stay cool here in Ohio. I'm sure you guys are trying to do the same there in
Oh,
Arkansas.
yeah. No question about it. It's definitely very humid. My wife and I just came back from Vegas
Oh,
last week watching my daughter play volleyball.
okay.
So it was, 117, 118. It was brutal.
Oh, so is your daughter mainly a volleyball or a hooper?
She's a volleyball. She
Okay.
actually was a track athlete at one point, and that was her best sport when she was younger. And then she migrated over to basketball, and had a pretty good basketball career going for her as a middle schooler. And then after her last game, in eighth grade, well, before that game, I challenged her to try to get 20 rebounds because that was kind of her calling card. She was a hustle person. She did all the dirty work, and she went out and got 24 rebounds, and she had 22 points. And 2 days later, she came and told me, "Dad, I don't really want to play basketball anymore." And the rest has kind of been history. She's kind of gravitated towards volleyball, and now she's picking up a lot of offers and interest, and we're just enjoying that process with her.
So, just kind of tell the listeners what you're doing now. I know you were at Arkansas for a while, but what is it you're doing now?
Well, I'm the head coach at Parkview Arts and Science Magnet High School here in Little Rock, Arkansas. It's actually probably best known for Derek Fisher, who played with the Los Angeles Lakers and who now coaches the LA Sparks. He's, he's kind of the most, I guess, memorable figure from here, although they've had numerous other guys who walk these hallways and through the doors and had an opportunity to play. But now, I've come in here replacing really two legends, Coach Al Flanagan, who was before me, and then before him, the late, great Charles Ripley. So now I've got, huge shoes to try to fill. But I've, been in Little Rock long enough. Prior to my coaching stint in Arkansas, I lived in Little Rock before. So I've got a lot of affinity for this place, as well as just knowing the history. And I'm trying to do everything I can to get it back to where it once was, but also try to continue to mentor and help educate and develop these young people.
Now, do any of your guys know anything about your playing career? Did you have to let them know?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that. Last year, well, when I came on 2 years ago, there were a couple of them who I guess were YouTubing me and Googling me, based off the conversations that they had with their parents. And then, we had a couple of horse games and a couple of King of the Hill games, and I beat them. And then I came here one day and I was having lunch in my office, and I looked up and they were all in the locker room, which just sits right off my office. And they were YouTubing me then, watching me play. And I stuck my head in and I was like, "What you guys watching?" And they had highlights of me going, and I was just really laughing, like, "Man, you guys actually YouTubing me." But it's kind of funny. I think they call themselves poking fun at me, the baggy shorts, the short haircut, and they were picking on me if there were certain plays that I didn't make. Like, "Coach, that's what you get on us about." So it was kind of a funny moment, but I think it also kind of brought us together and let them realize that I'm just like them, no different. I had aspirations of going to college and playing college basketball, and was very fortunate to be able to do so. And now I'm just trying to see if I can, help some of these guys reach that same level.
So, speaking of high school, you played high school for the Ruston Bearcats, and you averaged a little over 25 points, 9 rebounds, shot 62% from the field as a senior. You were a two-time All-Stater there, and one other guy on that first team in Louisiana was Kerry Kittles
Very
from
good.
St. Augustine. When you're from Ruston, Louisiana, that's where you played. Like, what was your first memories of basketball, and was there like somebody that you liked growing up, or was there a team or a player that you tried to emulate?
Man, now you're really taking me back. I've always been around basketball since I was like 5 years old. My dad played at Grambling State, and then I had an older brother who was all state before I was. Unfortunately for him, his life kind of went in a different direction due to some difficult choices. And I kind of followed them around always. My brother was 3 years older than me, so I was always with him and his friends, and really the guys in the neighborhood were the first group of guys that I kind of tried to emulate and try to hopefully be better than and challenge them to shooting contests, playing one-on-one and that type of thing. And, back in those days, the little guys went out with the older guys. You got beat up, taught, educated, all at the same time. And then, probably about 6 or 7 years old, I started watching, March Madness, and really just started watching a lot of different players from, Walter Berry to,
Wow.
Migrating to Wayman Tisdale. Obviously, growing up, everybody was a Jordan fan, so you got a chance to see Michael Jordan. But I actually remember, Lenny Byers, who a lot of people didn't get an opportunity to see play. So I was always a fan of the game, and I always watched, back in those days, you come home at 3 o'clock, 4:30, 5 o'clock, the Big East, the first game for the Big East song, and I always watched all the Big East games. And, then when the SEC was playing on Jefferson Pilot, watching guys like Chris Jackson and even going back to Ricky Blount and those guys who were at LSU and on some of those teams. Jim Jackson from Ohio State and some of the guys that he had on that team. I've always been a fan of the game. I've always tried to watch good players and good teams. Probably one of my favorite teams to watch was, back then, Earl of Pearl Washington, when he was at Syracuse and playing with Billy Owens and Derek Coleman and Howard Trish. That was my favorite team probably of all time. And I remember when they lost on the Key Smart jump shot, to beat them. I felt like I was a member of the team, and I was just as fan as those guys were.
Wow, yeah, you went into the Wayback Machine there. You start out with Walter Berry, but yeah, that's interesting. Being from Louisiana, Ruston's about 350 or so miles from Fayetteville, where Arkansas is. When did your recruitment start? Like it's a lot different then than it is
Right.
now. With
Right.
no internet, no social media. When
Right.
did things like start to get rolling for you?
Well, really, my 10th grade year. My 10th grade year is when I started seeing a lot of college coaches at my games. Obviously, playing AAU in the 9th grade and 10th grade, you always see coaches, but you really didn't know who they were there to see. And then when you started seeing some of the same coaches at my games, when I was moving from court 1 to court 5 or whatever the case may be, I started seeing some of those same coaches. And then, you go home for the summer and you start receiving mail from those people. And then enter into my junior year, I think is when we could start receiving phone calls. And that's, when I started realizing that I had an opportunity to play at the collegiate level and at a high level, because I really didn't know prior to that. And, I started getting calls from Arkansas and Tennessee and Memphis, Louisville and Kentucky. Billy Donovan was at Kentucky at the time as an assistant. There was a lot of guys that I got an opportunity to kind of meet over the years, not really knowing who they were, but realizing that I was blessed and fortunate to have crossed paths with them and, giving myself a chance to be able to complete at that level. Forget about playing in the Final Four. My whole goal was just to be able to play on television, on CBS, and just be recognized for being one of those players.
Yeah, and just to kind of lay the context, Scotty mentioned CBS. Like back in those days when you played on CBS, like on the weekend, I mean, that was a big deal. It's not like it is now where, you can pretty much see any team you want. I mean, I think to me, to some degree, it was better then because more is not. Sometimes I think less is more. It was just awesome to get to see different teams. Like being in Ohio, seeing you guys play, you knew it was a big game when you guys were on
Right.
TV.
Right.
So what was the like first like surreal moment for you in the recruiting game where like I can't believe I'm talking to this guy?
Man, the first moment was actually when Billy Donovan showed up at my high school game. Most of the coaches at that time, they weren't coming to see me play high school. They were normally going to see me play with my AAU team. And he showed up at my high school game, and I remember like it was yesterday, we were playing against Fayetteville, Louisiana. And I had a lot of points, but I didn't really shoot it well. And in my eyes, I didn't really think I played particularly well. But I remember Coach Donovan calling me after the game and just telling me that he liked what he saw, and it kind of caught me off guard. And I'm thinking, I played bad. You're telling me you like what you saw. And he was the first person that kind of told me that people forget that you can still play good and it not necessarily have been your best offensive performance. You can impact the game by rebounding. You can impact the game by making other winning plays. But he was probably the first assistant coach who really gave me confidence to be, hey, you know what? I can still shoot bad and still, be viewed as a good player. I didn't, really just predicate my game only on offense. I think fast forward to now, that's so different because if a kid doesn't shoot it well, then, you have certain guys that may say, oh, he can't shoot. When in actuality, he can shoot. He just had a bad game. So I think nowadays a lot of things are a lot more critical than what they used to be. And I think when you add social media and you add, all of the different avenues that these kids are communicating or getting information, I think that's where you start to have the disconnect about who's really who, who's really a good player versus who's really a great player or who's just okay.
Now, you mentioned your AAU team. You guys were pretty good.
Right.
Who was on that AAU team with you?
Well, the original team was myself, Gerald Honeycutt. We had a guy by the name of Ennis Flowers who went to Florida Atlantic. We had Lawrence Nixon, who actually went to Kansas as a dual sport athlete. We had Byron Fobbs, who played at McNeese. We had Chris Dunnington, who actually got drafted to Major League Baseball, but was a good basketball player. And we had a slew of guys that, back then it was all about getting scholarships.
Right.
But you had the option, though, if you qualified for the national tournament, you could always pick up 2 players from an opposing team in state to take them to the national tournament with you. So that same team, we beat Kerry Kittles and his group in the state tournament, and we wound up taking Kerry Kittles to the national tournament with us. He and a gentleman by the name of Tony Cutright from Zawada, Louisiana, who played at McNeese.
Did Kerry come with the high socks, or was he not wearing the high socks yet?
Oh no, he came with the high socks. That was kind of his MO. Kerry is an interesting story because we were very similar in the sense where that we kind of got, I guess the hype came with us our senior year, not really 9th, 10th, 11th grade, but Kerry played on some great high school teams, and he didn't really get recognized for his ability because he didn't even start. And people don't know that Kerry Kittles didn't start until the senior year of high school, but they were loaded with talent. And he started wearing the socks really to kind of stick out and to try to create an identity for himself. And obviously, if you see what he did at Villanova and what he was able to do in the NBA, it kind of catapulted him from there.
Was Randy Livingston, was he was he younger than you? He was in high school at about the same time as you.
Right. Well, Randy Livingston and I are actually the same age.
Okay.
However, he was a grade lower than I was. I actually started school early, so I was supposed to have graduated in his class. But because of my age and my mother not wanting me to be held back, I stayed in my class, and I wound up graduating high school at 17.
So fast forwarding here to the commitment. Who committed first, you or Corliss?
We actually committed, I think, right around the same time. I don't know if, he may have been a day before me. I may have been a day before him. But, we had kind of talked. And, the word around town for him was that, he may go to Georgetown or he may go to Indiana. And I was kind of trying to narrow my list down at the time. And he and I had met the summer prior to our senior year, actually prior to our junior year. He didn't know me, but I knew him. And I just kind of followed him around, watched him play. We wound up playing against them, and we kind of formed a relationship and just kind of stayed in contact. And when I came back from my visit from Pittsburgh, which I had only taken 3 visits. I took Arkansas, Pittsburgh, and Oklahoma. And when I got back from Pitt, it was so cold in Pittsburgh, and me being from Louisiana, I just wasn't used to that. And I was just like, man, there's no way I'm going to be able to go to school here. Like, I'm not going to be able to function. So he was one of my calls. I called him and was like, hey, are you really serious about going to Arkansas? And the first thing he said to me was like, hey, if you go, then I'm going to go. And so I go and take my shower and get ready for bed, because I got back, late that evening. And Coach Richardson calls, and he starts asking me questions about where I'm thinking about going, what am I waiting on with my decision. Arkansas is the right place for me. And I wound up committing that night, and the next thing I know, the next day, Corliss had committed too, and they just kind of kept it on the wrap. But we wound up signing both early, like that next week, and kind of just getting it out of the way.
Who was the main guy that recruited you most of the time for Arkansas?
Well, when it first started, it was the former coach from Murray State, Coach Scott Edgar. He left Arkansas and got the job at Murray State. I think he went on to Duquesne maybe after Murray State. And then when he left, Coach Mike Anderson, kind of took over the recruiting and handled it from there. So
you and Corliss, coming from Russellville, Arkansas, he's a McDonald's All-American. From what I understand, he loved Larry Johnson. Is that right?
Yeah,
growing up.
That's right.
So you come in with Corliss, but, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but Dwight Stewart and Corey Beck also came in with you guys, but they were coming from South Plains.
Correct.
And they both played at the same high school.
Both played at the same high school. Actually, I think the same middle school as well. Those guys actually grew up together. It's funny you mentioned these names. I just got the phone with Dwight, and I just talked to Corliss 5 minutes ago. But, Dwight and Corey were there. They were highly touted out of Memphis Fairleigh, and they both went to South Plains. And then they went to South Plains, played 1 year, transferred to Arkansas, and set out, because back then in the SEC, you could actually sit out a year for academic reasons. You can't do that any longer. But those 2 guys were there waiting. And then we also had, Clint McDaniel was redshirting. Ray Biggers was redshirting, and Elmer Martin was redshirting. So we had a host of other guys. And then Roger Crawford actually came in with us as a junior college player out of Birmingham, Alabama. And then we had a gentleman out of D.C. who was probably one of the best athletes I've ever seen in my life, but he wound up tearing his knee. Craig Tyson out of the College of Southern Idaho.
Yeah, so this is a pretty pretty big class. And it's interesting because you'll hear people talk about, how touted this class was, but, maybe it was just me being younger, but I don't remember that, until you start, once you won the title, it was like, oh, these guys were supposed to win this, but I don't remember that being the case. Because when you come in, you're coming off the back of, one of the greatest eras in Arkansas history with Day, Mayberry, and Miller. And, they were 115-24, made the Final Four in 90, should have made it in 91.
Right.
I don't know what happened in 90. I know, there were some things that happened in 92, their senior year, but you guys come in with a smooth transition from that class to your class. And you come out of the gates guns blazing your freshman year, because Corliss was out, right, to start the.
Yeah, he missed the first 13 games.
Okay.
Yeah, he had a broken toe. It was like his 4th metatarsal or something like that. Just doing conditioning, and it kind of set him back. But it's funny you mentioned the class not being as heralded. I share that message with my team almost every year, and it's something that I've really kind of adapted just to my lifestyle. It's odd how people can kind of control the narrative. It's just like you said, when we first came in, I think Todd did in that group, if I remember correctly, because I was a big hoop school, Streets of Smith, any magazine that was coming out, Athlon, it didn't matter. I was going to read it from beginning to the end. I wanted to know all the players, want to know where they were from, who was recruiting them, or who they want to play with in college, all those things. And I never forget, when Todd and those guys left, they finished up, they got beat by Memphis State their senior year in the tournament, which was an early exit for them, and they were heavy favorites to make it to the Final Four again. And they finished up ranked number 10 in the final poll. Well, that's, okay, April, May. June, July, August, September hits, new publication comes out, ranked preseason, Arkansas's 46 or something like that. So for us, we were wondering, okay, we know we lost Todd Day. We know we lost Lee Mayberry. We know we lost Oliver Miller. We know we lost Isaiah Morris. However, these other guys can play too. And for us, it gave us the perfect ammunition to kind of work as a group, focus on a common goal. And it really catapulted us because we felt like even if we were going to drop, we still should have been a top 25 preseason team. That's the way we felt. So for us, that's when the lack of respect thing started. That's when nobody thought we were good enough. Nobody wanted us. And then you know how it is. As a competitor, sometimes you have to kind of make things up in your head to really, really get yourself going. And
right.
For us, that was our claim to fame is we always felt like the world was against us. Nobody really thought we were any good. And you go from September to December, and all of a sudden we're ranked in the top 12, 15, something like that. And, we lose in the Sweet 16 to North Carolina, who eventually won the championship that year. And then we come back the next year after adding two guys, and we win it. And we go from being 46, top 10 or 15, to being preseason number one in the country, win it. And all of a sudden now, you guys were loaded. Just a couple of months ago, nobody thought we were any good.
Yeah.
Now we're loaded. So I've shared that with my guys because when I took this job at Parkview, that's the first thing I was told. There are no players there. Everyone left. You don't have anybody. And we made the playoffs that year. It wasn't necessarily the record we wanted, but we still made the playoffs. And then this year we come and we go 22-4. We losing the state semis. And now that's the narrative. We're loaded. And I'm like, wait a minute. These are the same kids that you guys said weren't any good. But it just goes to show you that if you get in the gym and you work, you bond together, you believe in the right thing, nobody can really control the narrative. You can write your own.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking about that class. And now I want to ask you about your freshman year there, because a huge game, third game of the season, you go to the McHale Center and play Arizona, who was very, very hard to beat there. Lute Olson, and you, in your third game, you scored 28 points out there, and you guys get the win at Arizona. I mean, I'm assuming that's a game that probably stands out in your mind from your days there.
Oh, no question. Probably one of my most memorable games, as a collegiate athlete. That was one of those games where nobody gave us a chance. We knew we didn't have anything to lose. They had Ed Stokes. They had, if I'm not forgetting, Sean Mills. They had Ray O's. They had Damon Stoudemire. They had Khalid Reeves. They had all the name guys. And they were actually, I think if I remember correctly, like ranked number 6 or something like that. And we were just coming in there really just trying to prove something. But for us, when we got there, we realized how big they were. We knew that we could not walk the ball up the floor. And Coach Richardson started telling us, hey, we got to be fast tonight. We got to be quick to every ball. Any loose balls we got to get, because we're not going to beat them if it becomes a up in the air game where the ball's always, 10 foot up above the rim. They're going to win that battle. So for us, it was just a game where we came out and like, okay, this is the chance we get, to prove to everybody right now, not having to wait 4 or 5 games from now. We get a chance to prove that we're one of the best teams in the country. And really, we just allowed our physical fitness, our mental toughness, and the fact that we had a coach who had kind of given us, I guess, the encouragement that we needed to go out and prove it. And for me, I just went out and played carefree, didn't really care about, how many points I scored, didn't really care about who was taking shots, but I kind of got going early and it really kept us in the game. But one of the biggest things about that game that people don't remember is I got the points, but Warren Lynn, who was a senior, that was one of those guys that people didn't think was very good. I think he had like 16 or 18. Robert Shepard, he set the steals record, I think he had 10. So we had guys who had been there who were very, very integral in terms of what we were doing. I just got, the benefit of the doubt with the points because obviously that's what they put in the papers most times.
Yeah, and you led the team as a freshman in scoring. You were SEC Freshman of the Year, All SEC. But you mentioned your physical conditioning, and that was a big part of, Coach Richardson's MO. What kind of take me inside? What was a practice like with him?
Oh man, very intense, very deliberate with his approach. But the one thing that I've always remembered is that he could say things that would just motivate you, and may not even be anything derogatory. It may not be anything loud. It was just going to be deliberate, and he was going to challenge you. So, our first probably 20 minutes of practice, whereas most people are probably warm up shooting or probably warm up, doing 3-man weave. Well, we had a series of things that we did. A lot of it included the heavy balls. A lot of it included the water ball, which most people don't even know what a water ball is. But if you take a half full basketball with water and nothing else, and you start throwing chest passes, and that ball starts moving, and you got to catch it, and then you got to make a pass with it. So our first 25 to 30 minutes of practice, it was gruesome, because you were running even if you didn't realize it. Like, it may have not been a line drill, but you're still up and down, up and down, up and down. And more importantly, Coach Richardson was up and down. He wasn't running, but he was walking at a fast pace. He was screaming and yelling, and he was sweating. And for us, we're looking at him like, hey, if he's working like this, well, it shouldn't be anything for us to work like that. And we really got to the point where it was about probably 35, 40 minutes, which that's actually where the 40 minutes from hell came from, because our practice, the first 40 minutes of practice would be way tougher than any game that you were going to play. So when you got to the game, you were actually elated and excited because it's like, ooh, we just finally get to play. We don't have to go through all these different things to get ourselves ready to play. And we just really tried to take it on the other team because we felt like there's no way we can pay that type of price and go out and just let up. We were going to make them pay for the line drill, make them pay for the, the extra trips down the floor, whether that be in transition, offensively, defensively, whatever the case may be. So that was kind of our approach. It was like, hey, we know no one's working as hard as we are. And on top of that, a lot of our practices with those type of workouts were at 6 a.m. And I'm not talking about 6 a.m. showing up. I'm talking about 6 a.m. taped, ready to go, stretched. Because when he walks in at 6, it's no time for talking. Like, he's ready to go right after it. And I think that's kind of what made that team so special.
Yeah, as a young guy watching you guys, you're enamored by the points or the fast pace and all the wins. But when I've went back and watched your teams play as I've gotten older, it just seemed like, and I don't even know if this was the case off the court, but you guys like really liked each other.
Yeah.
You shared, like, you were a great passing team. I mean, Corliss was a great passing, for a guy his size. He was a great passer. Corey Beck's another guy, could have been a lot more selfish than what he was. But it just seemed like, your conditioning always came into play, but also the fact that you guys played so well together.
Oh, I agree with that. I mean, back then in Fayetteville, and Fayetteville's a lot different now. I don't know if you've ever been there, but, we didn't have a lot of the restaurants, a lot of the different things that are there now. Back when we were there, if you were going to have a get-together, it was most of the time going to be at an apartment, or somebody's dorm room. It wasn't a lot of going here, going there, and doing things. It was always us together as a unit. And I really feel like that's kind of what made us that close-knit group, because we spent so much time together, whether that was going out to eat or whether that was ordering pizza in and watching TV together or getting a haircut. We all at one point had the same exact haircut. I mean, people won't even think about doing that today, but for us, it was just a sign of closeness. And we just kind of, even now, we're still all pretty much, very close. I just got off the phone with Dwight Stewart. He's getting ready to celebrate his 50th birthday. And we're trying to coordinate everybody getting together and going and hanging out with him and celebrate that. The big fella, Darnell Robinson, who was on that team we wanted, he just lost his mom. So, we're trying to make sure that, we're there for him. So No, that was a very, very close-knit group, and I don't think it'll ever be maybe team that will be that close, because now you got so many other distractions with social media and those things where as soon as kids walk out of practice, they're grabbing their phones and they're going to their phones. And we didn't have phones. Our conversation was, hey, man, what are we going to eat? Hey, is the cafeteria open? Hey, coach, is your wife cooking? And, so it was always trying to figure out what our next move was, but it was always together.
Yeah, that's you mentioned kind of nowadays. It's like I'm sitting there watching your game against Duke, and I'm sitting there thinking, there's no way we would see Grant Hill in this game, and as a senior in 2021,
Right.
And just I don't think kids nowadays understand the level of play in college basketball back then, because everybody that was good was there all the time.
Right.
And your team was one of those great teams when you go back and look into history, which you'll see a team now that is got a couple of great players and can win it, but I don't think you're going to see anything like that again.
No, I don't think you're going to see that. I think nowadays, especially when you think of these other alternative leagues that they're coming up with in order to entice young people to, go ahead and go pro.
Yeah.
I don't think you'll see many guys stand around as seniors. I mean, there are a few, but nowadays it seems like the older you get, once you start hitting 21, 22, I remember when Bobby Portis was about to get drafted and he was 20 and people were saying, he may be too old. I'm like, at 20? Like, how are you too old at 20? But it's almost like the game is getting younger. They much rather, spend time investing in a 18-year-old than a 20-year-old, even if the 20-year-old is the best player.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of times everything is kind of forecasted out, whereas you'll have a senior who may be one of the better players in the country who will get overlooked, because it's almost like a sin to stay. It's like, well, he stayed too long. What do you mean staying too long? If he would have left, then you would have said he left too early.
Right.
So I just think it's so much, hit or miss. And, one thing I tell people about this game of basketball is it's not rocket science. There's coaches, recruiters, whatever, that miss out on certain kids every year, maybe not thinking that kid is going to be that good. And then there's a slew of other kids that wound up being good that you would have never expected them to be as good. And then you've got everyone else in the middle who, hit or miss. Good kid, just okay. Kid who was highly touted, oh, he didn't pan out. Well, it didn't pan out, but who set the expectations? Was it the kid's expectations or was it your expectations? Because no one can really say that unless you're the Michael Jordan or LeBron James or Kevin Durant, you can't expect everyone to be on that level. And I think nowadays these kids in high school are getting, compared to pros. That's the worst thing you can do.
Right.
You're skipping a whole classification of people. It's kind of like I tell my guys, I'm never going to tell you are Kevin Durant. Like we have the kid now, Dallas Thomas. Kevin Durant, his favorite player, built similar in stature, walk alike, there's some similarities, but Kevin Durant makes $40-something million a year. This kid's playing for free.
Yeah.
How can we compare them? That's like comparing Bill Gates or Warren Buffett to an up-and-coming business.
Yeah.
You would never hear that happen. Nobody would even do that. That's an upstart company. Those guys are already self-made. So why are we comparing teenagers who are just playing this game for the love of it versus a 10-time All-Star and league MVP? But if I'm a coach who's in the room and I do that and I say, oh man, he's a pro. Why are you telling this kid that? He's not a pro yet. Nobody's paying him. He's only a pro once he starts getting paid.
Right.
But there's a lot of people that are, kind of putting the cart before the horse, and then we wonder why kids don't really understand what it takes. Well, a lot of it is the information that we're giving them.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty spot on. But when you think back to your playing days, and like we said, it was a lot different. Internet and social media completely changed the whole landscape, not only in
Right.
basketball, but just pretty much a lot of things in life.
Right.
So you guys, you wrap up your freshman year, and one gripe that I have is we beat Kentucky in the regular season, SEC tournament. It seemed like it was it was the same situation every year. We beat them in regular season, and then the SEC tournament, you lost to Kentucky in the SEC tournament, but you had a good run in the NCAAs there as freshmen. You mentioned you lost, I think, in the Meadowlands to North Carolina. And if I'm not mistaken, that was as close as anybody came to them in the tournament that year. And nobody really talked about that. That was a really good game that you guys played them in the Meadowlands.
Right. Yeah, they beat us on a backdoor play. Donald Williams, one of their favorite backdoor plays that they run out of timeouts. And, they called Robert Shepard being very aggressive in the passing lanes, which was kind of the way we played. We denied the lanes, and he got back cut, gave up a shot. But their size is what really hurt us. That's what led, I think, our coaching staff to go out and sign Lee Wilson and Darnell Robinson, because we needed that size. I mean, they had Montrose, they had Salvadori, and they had George Lynch, who was a beast on the glass. So they just kind of beat us up on the backboards, and we just didn't have enough size to combat that. But it's kind of like you said, nobody really thought that we were that type of team to even be in the game with them. But it was another testament to, I think, our team as well as our staff, is that, we felt like we could beat anybody regardless of, size. Obviously, they won the game, but I think it gave us the confidence coming into next year to really believe, like, oh, we can really win this thing. And that was what we started talking about from the moment we lost that game, when everybody cried and got it all out on the plane ride back. That's all we talked about was next year we're going to win it. And to be able to go and actually do it, I think that says a lot about, that team's character.
Yeah, moving into that 93-94 season, this team just seemed like, and we'll talk about the 94-95 team, but this team just seemed like they were like on a mission. Even your losses that year, I mean, you look at, you start the year 10-0, and then you lose, I think January 8th, you lost at Alabama by 2. You lost at Mississippi State by 1, and then Kentucky in the SEC tournament. But I mean, the regular season, I mean, you guys were just unbelievable. I mean, when you think about some of the performances you guys had, is there anything that jumps out about that 93-94 regular season?
Man, really the depth that we had and the amount of guys. Because I remember correctly, that first 10 games of the year, I don't think Corliss and I were playing very much because we were beating people so bad. I remember Alex Dillard making like 12 or 13 threes in a game at home. I remember when Missouri came in ranked like in the top 10, and we beat them by 50 or 52 or something. Now, that was unexpected. We made 23 threes that night, if I'm not mistaken. So, I mean, of course, you're going to win most games if you make 23 threes. But I think the one thing that stood out to me was after that first probably 3 or 4 games was that we really are deep. And it wasn't a problem, for a guy to raise his hand and say he was tired, because he wasn't afraid of who was going to come in behind him. Most times, you tell somebody they're coming out of the game, they're kind of looking like, you sure? You want him to come in like, I'm good. Well, that team, it was kind of like, you go give it 3 minutes, 4 minutes, and get your hand up and come out. We'll let someone else come in and pick up the slack. When they get tired, we'll, put you back in. And we kind of had a system. So I really just think our depth and then our practices were so competitive that really when we got to the games, it was pretty easy because we were going against top-notch competition every night. I mean, we had probably 5 guys on the bench that probably could have started at any other school, or at least most schools. And, the fact that they were, very comfortable with their roles and very comfortable with the fact that we had a certain group of guys that were pretty much going to start the majority of the game. But those guys always were ready to go. And, we still had guys who got opportunities to start games that probably wouldn't have otherwise. And nobody had any beef about it. I mean, if you go back and look at the championship game, we started Ken Biley, who was a senior, because that was Coach Richardson's tradition to start seniors. Well, you take a guy who hadn't been playing very much and you start him in the biggest game of everybody's career. And nobody in the locker room flinched. Nobody was looking like, hey, what's coach doing? It was just kind of like, oh, it's not a problem. It's kind of what we do.
Yeah, one guy you mentioned there with what you were saying is Al Dillard. And funny story, I was at the City of Palms a few years ago down in Florida, and I looked at this guy and I was like, I think that's Al Dillard. I mean, he looked a little different than when he played.
Right.
But I recognized him, and I think he was like stunned that somebody had recognized him. And I said, hey, man, I got to get a picture with you. But Al Dillard was an amazing story. I mean, I think he was, 25 years old when he came in, and he had to get his GED to do it. Maybe you could talk a little bit more about Al. I mean, he was an unbelievable shooter in clutch situations.
Yeah, he was like a folk hero, really. I mean, he had the prototypical story. They should have maybe did a movie on this guy's life. I mean, 25, gets his GED, goes to junior college and plays for 2 years, and then comes to Arkansas after being recruited by Cincinnati and a host of other schools. And when we brought him in, this is probably one of the first times you see someone who's 5'8" or 5'9". He'll tell you he's 6 foot, but he's probably 5'9".
He wasn't 6 foot.
Right, he wasn't 6 foot. But this was the one guy, he came in. It was the first time I'd ever been around someone that size that didn't really care about being a point guard. He was just like, that's not what I do. I shoot the ball. And it was amazing just to see it in practice, because the funniest thing about this guy is that he could shoot it deep, he could shoot it consistently, and he could shoot it with his left hand just as good as he could with his right. Not with the distance, but still from three. And he's the first person I've ever seen run off 5 or 10 threes in a row right-handed and then run off 5 or 10 left-handed. And you're just looking at him like, wait a minute, did I just see that? Now, he wasn't a point guard, but he was a magician with the basketball. He could do a lot of trick things with the ball, with passes off the elbow and different things. So he was one of the first guys that I saw that kind of had a bag of tricks with the basketball, but wasn't a quote-unquote point guard at his side.
Yeah, I remember him shooting threes. I mean, he had to be near that Hogs head at Bud Walton Arena. And the announcers always would make a point to mention that. And, he was just another one of those guys that just instant offense. And he didn't seem to have any memory of his last shot.
No. I actually watched the game, not the game, but some highlights from a game at LSU. And this is back when Randy Livingston was there, Ronnie Henderson was there, they had Clarence Caesar. And we were going back and forth, probably one of the fastest games we ever had against LSU at their place. And I'll never forget this. He came in the game for somebody, and I think it was Corey Beck, because Corey maybe had blood on him or something. He came in the game. He had a chance to shoot free throws to, I wouldn't say steal a game, but to get us up 3. He misses it. When he misses it, we get the rebound, pass it right back out to him, and he sinks a 3. And as I'm watching this, now, not, back then, I'm thinking, nowadays a kid wouldn't even take that shot. He would have been apprehensive because he was like, I just missed. I shouldn't shoot it. So he just had really no conscience, and that was probably, the best thing for him, because for our team, that was what we needed. A guy that could just come off, and God forbid if we were up 8, we may be up 14 by the time he gets done with his barrage. Or if we're down 8, he may bring us back and help us get the lead. There were several times in practice where he'd be on, say, the red or the white, and one team goes up by a lot, and coach would switch him and put him on the other team and see if he could help bring him back. And I remember several occasions where, he brought those teams all the way back, and you'd be like, man, we were just up 20, and all of a sudden he hit 4 or 5 threes, and it's a new ball game.
Scotty, who was the toughest guy on that team? I mean, as far as the day-to-day goes.
Toughest guy on the team day-to-day was probably Corey Beck. Just from a mental toughness standpoint, Corliss was probably the more physical, tougher, guy, but Corey was probably the most physical mentally and having the physicality to go with it. He just had a different mindset. He had a very business-like approach, which in turn, I think, just kind of gave all of us the confidence that we had the right guy running the show. He had asthma, and I didn't know it until we had preseason conditioning my freshman year. And we'd be running, and, he had this thing he'd always say. It was like, hey, we're working, we're out working, everybody, we're working. That was kind of his deal. And I'd see him walk over to the trainer and get the asthma pump and come right back, and he'd be first in the sprints. And I'm like, wait a minute, how this dude got asthma and he's outrunning all of us.
Yeah.
And one of my most memorable moments by Corey Beck was we were playing UT Martin at home one night, and it was actually a back-to-back for us, if I'm not mistaken, because we had just beat University of Memphis the night before. So we came back with UT Martin. That was the game before we went to Arizona, the game you and I just talked about. And the band's playing the music, and, Corey was one of those guys, he'd get with the band, and, he had his little one finger, and he was just singing and singing. They were playing, and I mean, as soon as the referee would blow the whistle and hand the opposing team the ball, he could just shut that off and just go straight into, okay, I'm back in game mode. And me, myself, I just be like, man, this guy's just kind of a different dude, and he played that way. He was just always intense, always engaged, but he was the one guy that everybody in the locker room respected who could say something to you and you didn't take it personal. And, he'd say it sometimes in a nice way. He'd say it sometimes in a not nice way. He and I would kind of bicker back and forth because we were kind of the pulse of the team from a vocal standpoint. We were probably the two most outspoken guys. And Corliss was more of the, I bring my lunch pail, I come to work. I don't really have much to say unless you guys ask me. And we were kind of the two guys that would go and talk to coach about what we felt was going on with the team or some of those things. But he's a guy that I have a tremendous amount of respect for, man. Corey Beck was definitely the leader of that team.
So you guys, you lose this game. You're on a 12-game winning streak heading into the SEC tournament, and you beat Georgia, but you lose to Kentucky. What's the team's mindset like heading? Was it like, just let's forget about that? Let's get focused on the tournament. How did you guys take that?
Man, we just kind of, it was probably it was a different feeling because, we felt like we should have won the game. We felt like we were the best team. We felt like we were playing best at that time, but that wasn't our night. We just didn't play up to our capabilities. So I don't think we really dwelled on it. I just remember us getting back to the hotel because back then, you play a game, you're on the plane headed back to school the next day, unless it was a weekend. There wasn't a lot of time to just be sitting around. So we were just like, hey, let's get back. Now we got to get ready to go win it, which is what we had been talking about the whole time from when we lost to Carolina all the way up to that game was we're going to win the national championship. We're going to win the national championship. No different from when we lost to Mississippi State. No different than when we lost, the other game. We always felt like we were the best team and we were going to win it.
Yeah, so you get into the tournament, you beat North Carolina A&T, you beat Othello Harrington and Georgetown. And this game, I don't know why jumps out at me as like that point where I was like, I think they're going to win it. I think it was like a real late night game against Tulsa. And you guys scored over 100 points against them. And if I'm not mistaken, it was probably about the same time that Boston College had beat North Carolina, which was a huge implications on the tournament because they had a lot of guys back, plus Stackhouse and Wallace from that team the year before. And thanks to Howard Isley and Bill Curley and those guys, they were able to knock them out. But was there a point or a game during that tournament run prior to the Final Four where you're just like, yeah, I think we're clicking on all cylinders right now?
And it was really just once we got to the tournament. I mean, we were just so excited. We felt like we were experienced. Having lost to Carolina that year before and getting those few games in the tournament, Sweet 16, we just felt like we were ready. I mean, we had brought in Darnell Robinson and Lee Wilson. We felt like we had the size that we needed to back up Corliss and Dwight Stewart. And we felt like overall we were just the best team. And I think for us, we just kind of felt like it was like now is the time for the world to get a chance to see that we are the best team in the country versus us having to just tell people or, wonder. For us, it was just like, hey, no matter who we play, we're going to keep the pressure on. And fortunately for us, Tulsa was a team that we played every year, anyway, in the regular season. So when we got to the point where we played them in Dallas, we were already familiar with them. And, they were a great club, and they had Tubby Smith at the helm, who was doing a great job with those guys. But we didn't really feel like they had enough to beat us. We knew their big three had to be hot, whereas we could not necessarily be hot. We just had a bunch of guys that could play.
Yeah, so, you guys beat Tulsa, and then who was it after that? Michigan.
Right.
So you beat Michigan with Juwan Howard, Jalen Rose, Jimmy King, Ray Jackson, and those guys. Right. If I remember, Juwan had a really good game in that game.
Yes.
But, you guys were able to beat them and then make it to the Final Four where two SEC teams, Florida was also in there with Lon Kruger, a team that you had beat in the regular season. So they were playing Duke on the other side. And you guys got a really good Arizona team. And I was watching this game the other day, and you guys, it just seemed like you were like, I don't know, you were like dominating this game, and you were taught, like Stoudemire hit that shot. He hadn't hit anything all first half, and he hits that shot to tie it at halftime. And then they had a lead there, and then you guys it seemed like you guys hit another level.
Right.
I want to say, Coach Richardson, when you guys were running that 40 minutes of hell, you were looking for that breaking point.
Right.
And it just seemed like, you had more in the gas tank than they did. Once they took the lead, then you guys, got it back pretty quick.
Right. Right. Well, that was a team, when you think about it, they had Reggie Gary, and I think Khalid Reeves was still there, and Damon. Those guys had to do a lot, for that team to be successful, whether it was initiating the offense, scoring points, picking up the other team's guards and guarding the full court. Whereas with us, we had depth. We talk about that depth, and that was our whole deal. I mean, that was one of Coach's talking points for each and every game. We got to make fatigue a factor. We're one of the deepest teams in college basketball. They do not want to play fast with us for a long period of time. And for us, we always felt like we were going to go on a 10-0, 12-2, 14-6, some type of run that would get us going. And that's the way we practice. Coach did a lot of periods, what he liked to call it, which it may not be a 6-minute period, but it may be 3 minutes, maybe 4 minutes. And he changed the score. So for us, we were prepared to go on that run. And there were some games, if you go back during that season, we won only because of the run. We went on a run, and the teams never got a chance to get back in it. And when you go on a 20-0 run or a 15-2 run, that's pretty demoralizing for other teams.
Yeah, you mentioned your spurt ability, your ability to make big runs, and moving forward to the championship game against Duke, you needed that big run. They got up, I think, 48-38. But, you guys erased that lead pretty quickly. I think maybe like 3 minutes or so, you guys had gotten that lead back. But, it was interesting. I don't know how many people would have picked, Duke to be. I don't remember how many people would have picked Duke to be in the finals that year. They lost Bobby Hurley the year before, losing to Cal and Jason Kidd. But Grant Hill's a senior. Antonio Lang is a senior. He had a great game that night against you guys. And Chris Collins shot the ball hit some big threes in that game. But, that big run that you guys had there to overcome that 10-point lead, was huge. Dwight and Corey and Clint McDaniel, who was coming off the bench for you guys that
Right,
in the
right.
Final Four. But yeah, just what do you remember about getting down 10? I mean, I'm sure it wasn't a huge deal to you guys with the way you guys
Right.
knew how you made runs.
Well, I remember Coach calling a timeout and just said, hey, we got to go on one of our runs, so he changed the defense up. And we kind of pulled back from the three-quarter court pressure and started playing a matchup zone. And I think it took them a while to kind of figure out what we were in. And by the time they figured it out, the game was already back tied up. But we kind of had Grant Hill, who was playing the point for them a lot, at the top where he had to initiate versus, Rome on the baseline, which was where he was, really probably at his best. But we kept him out on the floor, and we kind of forced those other guys, Chris Collins, Jeff Capel, those guys have to make plays. But it was different making the plays in the full court versus having to make them in the half court and not really recognize what defense was being played.
And just for some context for some of you younger guys that are listening, this team that Arkansas is playing with in the finals, we're talking about a day when guys were playing 3 and mostly all 4 years, and your team, everybody on the floor at the end of the game was coming back.
Right.
So this was a relatively young team with you and Corliss being sophomores in an era where that wasn't happening with young teams like that. But so you guys, everybody knows if you're an Arkansas fan or just a fan of college basketball, 50 seconds to go, 1 second on the shot clock, you pull that rainbow three over Antonio Lang, who is a pretty long dude. And, I was thinking when I was looking at that, you let that go with 1 second to go on the shot clock. Typically, watching you as much as I did, you would usually use a ball fake there and either slide to one direction or the other and hit a pull-up, but you didn't have time to do that.
Right. Yeah, I had no time to do it, and I kind of had looked up at the clock early when I saw Corey go baseline, and I knew that he couldn't get it to me because of where I was on the floor and how many hands he had around it. But when he kicked it out to the top, I really thought that Dwight was going to shoot it. But as he was kicking out to the top, I looked up and I saw the clock, and I'm like, it's at 4. And I'm like, there's no way that it's going to make it to me. So when it hit Dwight and he bobbled it, and by the time he got it to me, I knew that I didn't really have a choice but to just shoot it and live with the consequences and not be worried about whether or not he was going to block it or what have you. But the one thing that if you go back and look at it, if you look at how far he jumped from,
yes,
he was really on his way down as I was releasing the ball, and that's the only reason he missed it. I kind of timed him coming down as I was going up.
Yeah, I mean that obviously the biggest shot in Arkansas basketball history.
No question.
That goes through the hoop there. And some free throws, some missed free throws. It was like, come on, close the deal. And, you guys end up, getting it done. And I remember Jim Nantz saying, Arkansas is in hog heaven, as they've won their first national championship. And, how often do you replay that shot?
And to be honest, the only time I really replay it is when people ask me about it. That's the only time I really kind of go back into, oh man, I remember this and that. And, sometimes even if I close my eyes and I'm talking about it, I can kind of visualize the play and kind of the certain things that were going on at the time. But if no one's asking me, I really, to be honest, I don't think about it. I just kind of think about really the success I was able to have along with that team and the blessing that I got from being able to be a part of March Madness and playing at a school like Arkansas. And then I just try to apply those things that I learned as a player, things I learned as a coach, and just try to focus on what I can do to get these guys to play at that type of level. So that's really when I wake up in the morning, besides, meditating and saying a daily prayer and trying to get myself going for the things that I have to do during the day. I don't really think about it much. And to be honest, I don't mind talking about it, but I'd be perfectly fine if nobody brought it up because I'm so passionate about what I'm doing now.
Yeah.
But that's just kind of where my focus is.
Yeah, I mean, that's incredible. I mean, do when you hit that shot, could you hear the crowd, or was it like just one of those moments where it's like kind of frozen in time for a minute?
Yeah, it was frozen in time. Like I still don't remember the crowd noise. And I never watched the game until just last March when a local network here wanted to do a special with Corliss and I and kind of let us recap the game. But that was the only time I've actually watched the game in its entirety. I didn't realize I missed a couple of other chippies, down the stretch that probably would have gave us more separation. But fortunately, it came back to me at the right time, and I was able to knock that one down.
Yeah, when you played, it always just seemed like you were, it was like poetry in motion. You weren't ever like in a hurry. You were just so smooth. You played with that baggy shirt underneath, which,
Right.
is somebody that I told was going to be on the podcast. They said, "Is he going to be wearing the triple X white tee underneath?" I said, I don't think so. But you were always just. It was always like you were in control, and you could never tell like, was Arkansas up 10, down 10, tied?
Right.
You were never afraid to take those big shots and get Arkansas going, or it just seemed like you always would hit big shots in big moments, and the moment was never too big for you. Corliss struggled a little bit early in that game, I think, with Parks' size, Cherokee
Right.
Parks, but I always thought, and you spent countless hours with him, but Corliss was so good at beating his guy down the floor. He was in such
Right.
good shape, and he was so quick at that size. He was so much quicker than big guys in that era.
Right. Right.
And he was just so relentless. He always seemed to, no matter how he started, he finished strong.
Right. Well, I mean, he was gifted. Corliss was probably. I hate to call him a big guy because of today's game, he's probably not really a big guy per se, but he had those big feet, had those tree trunk legs, those big hands, soft hands, and he knew that if he ran, we were going to get it to him. Nowadays, a big may make 5 or 6 trips. Not that there's a lot of traditional bigs, but they may make 5 or 6 trips, and no one ever really throw them the basketball. But yet, and still, you want to rebound and block shots and help you on defense. Well, for us, we were the opposite. We knew that we had a weapon, and we knew that if he ran the floor, if we threw it to him, whether it was a bounce pass, chest pass, over the head, he was going to catch it. And it's just kind of one of those things where he just kind of allowed that to be kind of his signature, because if you think about it, in high school, the ball don't really move that fast a lot of times in terms of transition offense.
Right.
So for him, he would always run. And I remember sometimes I would take it out of bounds, which most perimeter guys have never taken the ball out. But I would jump out and just throw deep sometimes and just throw it over the top, and he'd be catching and finishing it, because that was kind of like an added bonus for us in terms of just any extra points we could get that way before having to actually get down the floor and set it up. But with his strength and his hands and his toughness and the way that he would really fight to get the basketball and shield guys off, I really think that's what separated him, because, there was no coming around him. Once he got you behind him, you were pretty much dead.
And Corliss was a guy that kind of reinvented himself in the NBA.
Right.
And I believe, did he win a championship with the Pistons?
Yes, he did.
Yeah, so I remember him shooting way more face-up shots with Detroit and in the NBA than he ever did at Arkansas.
Oh, there's no question about it. He kind of was forced to change his game. When you got, back then there was no defense for 3 seconds, so guys could actually be standing under the basket, just drive in there. They're going to block it.
Right.
So, he kind of reinvented his game. And for him, thankfully, it kind of propelled him into being the 6th man of the year with that team.
Well, I did want to ask you a couple more things here before I let you roll. The 94-95 season, you guys come back. Was there ever any was there thought of leaving prior to that season?
No, not for me. I think Corliss kind of flirted with it a little bit, but for me, I never really thought about it.
Yeah, so you guys come back, and I don't know, from an outside point of view, it just seemed like there was something off or something missing with that team. The whole it just something was it was different. You know, you start out and play a really good UMass team and get blitzed,
Right.
but then you go on a nice winning streak. You beat Kentucky. I think that was on a Sunday afternoon on Super Bowl Sunday. But then you lose that crazy overtime game against Kentucky in the SEC tournament in the Georgia Dome. I think that was an overtime game.
Yes.
But you get into the tournament that year, and it's like, I mean, you look at the results. I mean, you were lucky to get out of that first round game. As were you a 2 seed that year?
Yeah, I think we were a 2 seed. We barely beat Texas Southern that year, and then we played Syracuse. And Lawrence Moulton called the timeout. Which actually, he got the blame for it, but his whole bench was screaming timeout as well. That year was different in a sense because, you know, when we talk about this a lot of times it's kind of like in, you know, just in passing by and in generic conversation. But it's a lot different being the hunted than it is being the hunters.
Yeah.
And for us, it kind of got to a point to where I know I don't want to speak for everybody on the team, but at least for me, it started to feel like a job, if that makes sense. It wasn't just fun anymore. It wasn't just basketball. It was so many guys on the team being pulled in different directions. So many guys being, you know, going home and celebrating days. I had a Scotty Thurman day. There was a Corliss Williamson day in Russellville. Corey Beck and Dwight Stewart had a day. And, you know, I think sometimes, you know, you can start to celebrate yourself or your accomplishments a little too soon when there's still work to do. And I think that was kind of one of the things that team struggled with, you know, kind of being a victim of your own success. And I don't think it was anybody's intention to feel that way. I just think it's human nature at some point that, you know, we all as people sometimes can get a little full of yourself if you start, you know, reading the press clippings or reading about yourself. It's no different than what we're talking about with these kids who are looking at themselves on social media and everybody telling them how great they are. You know, I just think that was just before the social media era. You know, thank God that there wasn't social media back then, because who knows how we would have really reacted, you know, after we won it, as opposed to, you know, trying to come back and do it again.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just goes to show the level of team that you had, because we're sitting here, we're talking about a team that finished 32-7 in national runner-up. I mean, we're not talking about a team that got beat in the first round. But, you know, the one game that jumped out at me where I was like, I don't know, man, you guys lost at Bud Walton by like 18 to Alabama. And I was like, ooh, man, that's, you know, losing at Bud Walton doesn't happen very often. And then, you know, to get beat like that was, and then the big loss, I think, to Mississippi State at Mississippi State. But, you know, you rallied and somehow escaped that Syracuse game. That was a miracle. Then you beat Memphis, beat Virginia. And, you know, I thought maybe you guys, you know, had that momentum after you beat North Carolina, that talented North Carolina team in the Final Four. You guys played really well that night. Corliss had a really good game against those bigs from North Carolina. But, you know, I thought, okay, you know, here they are. They're in the championship. UCLA's coming in. They're lucky to be here. Tyus Edney hits that shot against Missouri. You know, what was the mindset going into that UCLA game?
I mean, no different than the others. I mean, we felt like we had a chance to win it. You know, I think the biggest thing that we did probably different was, I remember Coach wanting to try to press them. And then, you know, Tyus Edney went out. Well, he didn't want to press with Tyus Edney, but when Tyus Edney went out with the thumb injury, they brought in Cameron Dollar. And when Cameron Dollar came in, I think Coach kind of decided to go for the gusto and let's start pressing. And Cameron Dollar wound up having 10 assists and 1 turnover as a true freshman. And it was unexpected. Toby Bailey had a great game against us, another freshman. And those were 2 guys, like, not that they weren't on the scouting report, but those weren't 2 guys that we felt like were going to really, really have a huge impact on the game. Now, that's us as players. Whether the coaches thought so, you know, that may be a good question for them. But we really felt like we had the best team. But I just think we got to a point where, you can't come out and not put forth the type of effort when you've got people who are already gunning for you. Having had been the national champion before, we were everybody's championship game. I remember losing at Ole Miss, they rushed the floor. Losing at Auburn, they rushed the floor. So every time we went and played someone, that was their championship game. But the only difference was that you can't really explain that. It's hard for a coach to tell people, hey, you guys are everybody's championship game. You got to be ready. It's one thing to talk about it, but when you experience it and you see how much it means to that other group that's actually celebrating because they beat you, that's when you really know that you've made your mark in terms of gaining respect. So I think we wanted the respect. We earned it. But I don't think we really understood what it was going to be like from the other side in terms of how that would play out for us. I think it was more of a deal where we just thought it's still basketball, and it was still basketball, but it's a little bit different when everybody's gunning for you.
Yeah, I mean, it was a tough night. You guys got a pretty good lead early in the game, but, UCLA, you mentioned Toby Bailey, 26 points. I still remember him throwing that reverse dunk down.
Right.
Ed O'Bannon, I think, had 30.
Yeah.
It was just it wasn't that night. But if you think about it, in that era to go to back-to-back national championship games, win one, runner up. I mean, you talk about like UNLV, even the great team that they had in '91 couldn't get back to the title game,
Right.
and you were able to do that, win one and get runner up. Just an incredible era. And I mean, I guess if you're maybe 40 or older, Arkansas from about 89 to 95, I mean, they're in the conversation every year for one of the best teams in Final Four spot. And if you told
Right.
kids that today, they would be like, what are you talking about? But, and Musselman's got them, I think, they're going to get to a Final Four at some point. But, right after you guys leave, and I'm going to end on this, I want to ask you one team question and one individual question. But, you guys depart after your junior year, you and Corliss, and Derek Hood, Kareem Reed, Pat Bradley, and those guys come in with pretty high expectations.
Right.
Hood's a McDonald's All-American. What do you think has happened since that 95-96 season to now where they just haven't been able to recapture that magic?
Man, I think a lot of different things. I think, there was no longer the benefit of being able to take, kids who don't qualify academically and allow them to sit out and go to school part-time. I think that's one thing. I think now with the SEC being so big in football and generating so much finance for the SEC and the league itself, I think other schools are now, capturing resources that they may have not had. And you look at Alabama, they go from being just a football school to having a pretty good, basketball program. You look at Calipari comes in, and look what he's done at Kentucky. You look at Tennessee, Rick Barnes, and what he's come in and done. You look at Bruce Pearl at Auburn. So I think the coaching, not that those other coaches weren't good, but I think the coaching got maybe stepped up a level. I think the recruiting has changed. But then I think the biggest part of it is, and this is something I even tried to share, with the staff during my time when I was with Coach Pelfrey and when I was with Coach Mike Anderson. I don't think we did a good enough job. I don't think the coaches in the past have done a good enough job, and that's whether that was Stan Heath, whether that was, I can't say Dana Altman because he only lasted for a day. But I don't think they did a good job of recruiting the states that touch Arkansas. I think there's so much pressure to recruit Arkansas kids. And of course, most of the kids in Arkansas grow up wanting to go to Arkansas. But you always have to go back to what you mentioned, which was those kids don't remember how good Arkansas was when it was at its best. And you can't sell a kid that's in 2021 or 2022 or 2019 or 18, you can't talk about the 94 championship with them. That's too long ago. I think you have to be able to implement things that maybe illustrate the past, but be able to learn from it. And if you go back and you look at those rosters, Oklahoma was represented, Texas was represented, California, even though it doesn't touch, was represented. Derek Hood, Missouri was represented. Louisiana, for when I played there, Alabama. So all of these states that touch, I think Arkansas has done somewhat of a disservice in those other states in terms of making sure that you can go in there and get some of those good players too, because a lot of those kids don't want to stay at home. Whereas now a kid in Arkansas, if he's being recruited by Kentucky or Kansas, in his eyes, Arkansas is not on that level for whatever reason, but it's mainly because they don't know about what transpired from, 88 to 95. And I think it's just one of those things that kind of, people would probably debate with me about that, but I really believe that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm right there with you on that, and a lot of the like the reason I love doing these past history stuff is so kids now do realize what was out there and what was happening, and I hope that one of my biggest hopes is as an educator, as a school teacher, is that kids will start to appreciate history more, and the people that paved the way for them to be able to do what they're doing right now. Now, last question I want to close with is from an individual standpoint, and this is the biggest head scratcher to me to this day. You left after your junior season. Corliss left after his junior season. He gets picked 13th by the Kings. How in the world did you not get drafted?
Man, that's the $1 million question.
I mean, am I wrong in asking that? I have no idea how were you not one of the 60 or 58 or whatever they had at that time? How were you not one of those picks?
Well, I think it was probably a couple of things. I had an inexperienced agent, because at the time, you don't really know that the NBA is a fraternity and that the agent pool is a fraternity and the general managers and all of that. So for me, if you're told you're going to be a first round pick by the people who are actually having picks, then my whole deal was, hey, let me make sure I get someone who's going to help me preserve the income that I'm about to make. Wasn't really focused on endorsements, wasn't really focused on, who I played for or with. I didn't have any prep. I just wanted to be in the NBA. And I thought that if I got drafted, hey, if I go in the first round and I get guaranteed money, I'm going to make sure I do right by this money. But I didn't pick someone who was at the forefront in terms of like the David Falks of the world or the Mark Bartelsteins. I had someone who was kind of up and coming. They were more on the NFL side than the NBA. I don't know if that really helped me. I played in the combine, which probably shouldn't have. Probably should have just waited to let it play out because I had already had enough games where scouts had saw me. And then, not to point, finger at everybody else, but I remember getting a call from the Houston Rockets on draft day, and they had maybe the second to last pick in the draft because they just won a world championship. And they called me and they asked me if I'd be available. And I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, it may have been Jim Bolin, who was actually coaching the Bulls that got let go last year. And he said, hey, if we call your name, are you going to be available for comment? And me being, 20 years old, in my mind, I'm thinking there's no way I'm going to be around when you pick. So I was just, probably nonchalantly into a fault, but not knowing, inexperienced. I was like, yeah, I guess. Now, they picked Eric Meek, who went to Spain and never played a minute in the NBA. And that was probably my best workout was for the Rockets. So probably had I said, hell yeah, I'll be available for comment.
Yeah.
They probably would have taken me in the second round. But that's being young, being inexperienced, and not knowing. However, and I'll go to my grave with this, no one can tell me that there was 29 players in the draft that was better than I was. But as we all know, and I share this with my guys all the time, everyone's not going to get the same thing out of this game. And I've just kind of learned to live with it and learn not to let it be an eyesore for me or something that requires me to lose sleep. But I also understand that, there probably could have been some things done maybe differently on the front end, with representation and things of that nature. But to be honest, and some people, listeners, may not believe this, but for my life to have gone the way that it's gone in terms of places I've been able to go travel and play, being able to attain, my bachelor's and my master's, being able to wake up and teach and coach, being able to be involved in business, whether it be medical or real estate, I don't really know if I would have had it any other way. Because when I look at some of my friends who were actually drafted, at that time, a lot of those guys are still living tough lives after making millions of dollars. And, I'm fortunate enough to be 46, still breathing, still upright, 2 beautiful kids, beautiful wife. And to be honest, man, living a pretty damn good life. And, I don't know if I'd take it any other way.
Yeah, man, I had to ask you that because it just boggled my mind for years of how a guy like you could not have been made a roster. It's
Right.
just unbelievable to me.
Hey, you'd be amazed at how many times people actually ask me that. Now, that's a question that I get asked quite a bit from, people who see me every day. But I'm not so sure that if that were to have happened, all the other things I've been able to do, I'm not so sure I would have ever done.
Yeah.
So, I kind of look at it glass half full, glass half empty type of thing. And if I go back at 1920, it was devastating for probably 12 to 24 months of my life because, you held up on this pedestal and all of a sudden you come out of school and don't get drafted and everybody's talking about how much of an idiot you are and why would he leave and all these things. The very same people who were telling you that it's time to go, you know what I mean? But for me, it's one of the toughest life lessons I had to learn, but probably one of the best is that just don't believe your flesh clippers, man. I tell my guys it all the time. You go 30-0. Don't believe you're that good because all it takes is that one loss and everybody can start saying you're not that good. And then are you going to believe them? Or are you just going to come in and believe that if I bust my tail and I do everything I'm supposed to do and I work hard, that I'm going to get rewarded for it? And that's kind of the way I try to approach it. I would have loved to have played in the NBA and still feel like I should have had that opportunity. But unfortunately, it didn't happen. But on the flip side, fortunately, it allowed me to get involved in so many other different things around this game and be able to travel the world doing it. So I don't have any regrets, that's for sure.
Well, Scotty, there's no question you will always be one of the greatest college basketball players of all time. But more importantly, you played on a team that played the right way and just was a true team. And I think that's what's going to be remembered most about you and your time with your guys at Arkansas. And I greatly appreciate you doing this.
No problem, man. I appreciate you doing it. When you get it all cut up and get ready to post, man, send me a link so I can tweet it out and let everybody know.
I will, man. Hey, I greatly appreciate you taking this time, Scotty.
No problem, man. I enjoyed it, man. You have a good rest of the week.
All right, you too.